Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful HIMSS conference here in Chicago. My name is Abe Ankuma. I am the Vice President and General Manager for VMware's SD-WAN and SASE business. And I'm going to spend this session talking about how to implement a digital-first healthcare strategy powered by SASE and the enabling technologies that go with it. So the first thing I want to talk about is exactly the set of things that are changing in healthcare, right? These trends are happening in many different industries, but specifically in healthcare, these changes are happening at a pace that, on the one hand, creates an opportunity in terms of clinical outcomes, but on the other hand, really requires a rethinking of how we implement certain technologies that are actually very critical in terms of clinical outcomes. The first change that's been happening in healthcare, and I would say the pandemic in so many ways turbocharged this, is everything about hybrid work. Hybrid work from the perspective of, the fact that patients, frankly, no longer need to physically go into a hospital to receive care, right? In the middle of the pandemic, elective procedures, as many of you know, really went practically to zero, right? There were economic outcomes that a lot of healthcare systems had to deal with that change. But the notion of hybrid work means that, you can receive care, hospitals can deliver care, doctors can deliver care, really from wherever they have access to a digital device. The other change that's also been happening is the fact that connected care and being able to access the different modalities of delivering care is actually now possible. It's able for hospital systems to consult with experts who might not necessarily be physically in the same place. And this whole notion of virtual care is really becoming something that is enabling and driving clinical outcomes. Now, when it comes to connecting remote healthcare providers, when it comes to connecting patients with remote healthcare providers, when it comes to accessing medical records, one of the critical things that really matters is actually connectivity. How do you connect users? How do you connect clinics? These can be hospitals, these can be pop-up clinics, these can be an ambulatory system. How do you connect these different points of care to applications that are hosted in many different locations? A decade ago, 2 decades ago, all the way care was delivered was you went to a clinic, the applications within that clinic were housed within the data center of that hospital. Epic was deployed in your data center, your application was housed there, and that's how your doctor accessed your medical records. That's how they would prescribe things to you, and that's how you'd access that. That's completely changed. And so if you think about what's happening today, the picture on the left is where users and devices are. You can think about the left side of the picture as where your doctors are holding onto a medical device. You can think about the left side of that picture as to where your infusion pumps, which are delivering care at the bedside, are. And then everything on the right is also the other part of the change. Applications are no longer simply in your data center. Applications, a lot more so now, are either in the cloud. Some of these applications, or these so-called edge applications, are in some cases continue to be in the hospital's own data center, but the application landscape is no longer a monolithic one-size-fits-all. And so on the left-hand side, you've got a very distributed workforce and patient population. And on the right-hand side, you've actually got applications that have also become increasingly distributed. And when it comes to implementing a digital-first strategy, all the tools from a networking and from a security standpoint really have to evolve with what has happened in terms of where patients are and where your applications are. And this is where SASE comes into the picture. SASE is all about bringing networking and security together to support the highly diverse set of users and highly distributed set of applications. And so everything that we talk about and VMware enables from a healthcare point of view is powered by this underlying technology. But you know what? The technology is primarily there to build, to deliver outcomes. And so when I talk about outcomes within healthcare, part of it is how do we actually enable a clinic completely modernize the underlying infrastructure, everything from connectivity to securing access to those applications. The threat landscape obviously has increased, right? Whether it's ransomware, whether it's what do you call it, capturing patient data. And so when it comes to driving healthcare outcomes, one of the really critical things is how do you modernize the underlying infrastructure to support these challenges that we described. The other part of outcomes is around how do you enable something like telehealth. Telehealth where you have to connect to a patient with real-time applications, whether it's connecting via voice, whether it's connecting via video, whether it's pulling up large images, large files that might have the diagnosis of the patient that the provider on the other side needs to look at in order to actually effect a diagnosis. And so on the one hand, it's driving virtual care. On the other hand, it's enabling doctors to and clinicians to deliver care from anywhere. Then it's also around how do you do this in a secure and compliant fashion, right? Obviously, within healthcare environments, it's a fairly regulated environment. Access to patient data, which is very confidential, needs to be done in a very secure fashion. And so how do you enable a hospital system to support these initiatives without putting that hospital system at risk? It requires an underlying technology that is purpose-built to support distributed users and also access applications in all these remote locations. The other thing that's also been happening in healthcare is, in terms of digitization, is an increasing number of connected devices, IoT devices, in hospital systems, right? You've got infusion pumps, you've got temperature sensors that might be used to make sure that whether it's drugs, whether it's a sample that's been collected and has to be tested, is actually kept under the right environmental conditions. All of those devices and an increasing number of IoT devices are on that hospital network. And so how do you make sure that you actually know what's on that network? Because the biomedical team might start bringing in devices that from an IT perspective, you might actually not be aware of. These devices might just connect to the network. How do you make sure that they're properly segmented? And SASE is that foundational technology that enables that. And so one pillar of SASE is something called SD-WAN. It's all about making the network software defined, making sure that it's cloud delivered. And then the other part of SASE is all around security and compliance. And again, making sure that the network is agile and dynamic enough to respond to the needs that I described earlier. Distributed applications and a distributed hospital system, whether it's the physical footprint of that hospital or whether it's actually where the folks delivering care might be located. So everything about what we're doing is, on the one hand, supporting the fact that the overall environment has become radically distributed, from users all the way to applications. And VMware SASE is that technology that sits in the middle of all of it and enables hospital systems to securely access those applications. Now, let me just bring this home with some very specific examples. I talked about remote care. So think about a patient sitting with a doctor, not physically in the hospital, but being able to interact with that doctor and making sure that the experience of actually that connection is flawless. That's one of the things that we deliver with SASE, optimizing real-time voice and video from a connectivity standpoint. Think about patient monitoring, being able to deliver care at the bedside and potentially consult an expert, transfer large images over a network, and making sure that there's no fidelity loss in terms of access to that image. That's another use case that SASE enables. Making sure that even within a hospital system, the staff are able to collaborate. They're able to quickly share information in a secure, reliable, timely fashion. That's a use case that SASE powers and enables. So I talked about work from anywhere. I want to just highlight a few things. Work from anywhere really means, irrespective of where the user is connecting from, guaranteeing the same type of access and experience when they are accessing clinical applications, patient data, patient records. And so a doctor can be at a clinic and be able to access the records they need to deliver care. That doctor, with the right device in hand, can also be able to access those same records when they're on the road. They might be at HIMSS, or they might be somewhere else. It's all about being able to guarantee that seamless connection. If you're in a hospital, we do that by providing a software-defined SD-WAN solution. If you're on the road, we do that by providing an SD-WAN client. You basically install this client on your device, and that client is built on ZTNA principles. And those ZTNA principles make sure that that device can only access the set of applications it's required to access when the device is at the right form and in the right posture. Right. Now, another example is supporting your users who are working from home. And so think about sort of a payer system where you have to support users working from home, but giving them the same experience, whether it's picking up the phone, whether it's doing voice over the phone, but having that same infrastructure at home, but also enabling the IT team to manage that infrastructure at home, just like they would be able to manage that infrastructure as if it was in the hospital. And so being able to do that under the same single pane of glass and providing that rich enterprise network experience at home with very similar infrastructure, but purpose-built for that home environment. And so that's another part of SASE and the dimension SASE enables. So we talked about security and compliance. Part of it is all about enforcing zero trust. Zero trust is all about using the principles of least privilege and enabling a doctor, a clinician, to only access data that they have the rights to access. Making sure that, let's say, if their device is compromised, that particular device is cut off from accessing anything else. And so zero trust principles are very foundational when it comes to SASE, and that's inherently built into what we've done at VMware with our overall SD-WAN and SASE solution. The other thing when it comes to SASE is there's been an explosion of web applications. And so when it comes to accessing web applications, being able to do things like advanced threat protection in terms of application access, whether the application is within the clinical network or whether the application is across the internet. Being able to do things like automatic detection of the application, enforcing access to that application, detecting ransomware. And so being able to actually take an application, put it within a sandbox, detonate that application within that sandbox is another critical part of safeguarding healthcare information within the SASE architecture. And then we do all of this with an understanding of the regulatory landscape, whether it's HIPAA or whether it's PCI. Capturing credit card information is something that hospital systems do. And so thinking about that is you're within the hospital system, you're effectively running a retail network, you're effectively running a HIPAA network, and how do you do that without building multiple networks and making that very cost prohibitive? And SASE foundationally enables that. So it's great to have a network that's performant. It's great to have a network that's secure, but it's equally important to be able to understand the day two operations of that network, having complete visibility into what's happening on that network. What are the connected IoT devices that are showing up within your environment? What new applications are being consumed within your environment? And so the day two operations of that network is equally critical. And within VMware SASE, we enable that by providing this construct of a single pane of glass, which is AI and ML powered to drive day two operations. And so when you think about SASE, it's cloud delivered networking, it's cloud delivered security, but it's equally important to make it operational from a day two perspective, using AI and ML and providing complete visibility in that infrastructure. Now, as I wrap up, think about the use cases of bringing up new sites quickly. That's pretty critical. So quickly onboarding a new site, whether it's a pop-up clinic, whether you have to provide connectivity in an ambulatory setting, being able to bring up those sites, being able to monitor those sites, being able to do that quickly without compromising performance and security are really important tenets when it comes to digitizing healthcare. And from a connectivity solution standpoint, SASE has been purpose-built to do that. Now, as I start to wrap up, when it comes to things you should think about as to whether this is the right time to embrace SASE, we think about this by making the point that you don't have to embrace all of it from day one. It's a journey. You could start by deploying our SD-WAN solution as that starting point, right? That brings you into the overall framework and architecture where some of the additional things I talked about, whether it's being able to have better IoT visibility in your environment, is critical. And so the things that I would say are important to consider as to whether SASE is right for you is, do you have applications that are increasingly moving to the cloud? If that's the case, and you're in a multi-cloud environment, SASE is a really compelling way to actually effectively run and securely run your network and do it in a cost efficient fashion. The other thing I would say is, do you have clinicians, do you have patients connecting and needing to connect and talk to each other from remote locations? Do you have clinicians working from home? If that answer is yes, then SASE is that foundational technology that will enable you to do that in a seamless, secure fashion. And then finally, you have an increasing set of applications. Some of them are moving into the edge. You have applications that might be driving a clinical application in a hospital. I talked about IoT. If those are things that you start seeing emerge in your environment, then SASE from VMware is that technology for you. We have, we've put this in practice with many, many customers. We have customers in the healthcare space who've used this technology, whether it's effectively driving radiology and enabling their radiologists to access files from remote locations. We have a lot of healthcare systems leveraging this today and are on the journey to fully embracing the SASE solution to secure them. So as I wrap up, again, talked about clinical outcomes, and I'm going to put this up there. If you want more information about VMware's SASE solution specifically for healthcare, grab this QR code, and I can open it up to questions if we have time.